All right, hello. My name is David Agranoff. I'm author of The Vegan Revolution with Zombies, Boot Boys of the Wolf Reich, and Flesh Trade, co-written with Edward Morris. I am here with Marvin Vernon, who's a critic. Marvin, introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Marvin Vernon, and I run a book review blog called The Novel Pursuit. You can also catch my reviews over at Goodreads, and I've been doing this since I think about 2011, but I would have to go back to check.
So Marvin and I read a lot of the same books, and so when we do, we like to record these discussions. They start off spoiler-free for the first 5 minutes, or we try to, and then we get more into the weeds of books. We are not professional podcasters, so if you hear sounds or whatever, I don't pretend to have the best sound in the world. But in this case, we both read Artemis, which is gangbusters bestseller follow-up to The Martian by Andy Weir. And me personally, I knew a lot going into this book because I subscribe to a lot of podcasts that are astronomy and space related, and Andy Weir went on literally every single podcast that I listened to in that like Weekly Space Hangout, Astronomy Cast, Star Talk. He was on all of them promoting Artemis. So I heard many interviews with him, and then I got the book because one of the podcasts that I listened to had a contest. I entered it, and I won VIP tickets to see Andy Weir live at the University of California, San Diego, promoting Artemis. And the link to that lecture is going to be in the same blog post that this audio is in. So if you want to see that, you can see that too. So we have similar opinions on Artemis, but I think I liked it a little bit more than Marvin. Marvin, do you want to give your initial spoiler-free thoughts on Artemis, and had you read The Martian?
I read, this is kind of strange, I read most of The Martian. I say that because, I better explain that. I saw the movie first. Mm-hmm. And the movie was so good, I went to read the book. I found the book good, too. But I decided, I would say two-thirds through, that I really read enough to get an idea. I didn't think it was all that much different than the movie. Actually, I preferred the movie more, even though I liked The Martian. So the answer is yes, most of it.
Yeah.
Now about how... I do in my review. I do mention a few comparisons, but I mainly talk about comparisons of style and characters. My opinion on Artemis is I liked it. I liked it as a thriller more than a science fiction novel, and I'll probably go into that a bit more. But it didn't really excite me. And we'll go in. I'm sure we'll go into that about some of the problems why it didn't excite me. But I did recommend it as a entertaining read, and I do recommend it for that, as long as someone isn't looking that very much into having a lot of really good science fiction, because I don't think it's really good science fiction.
Well, it's funny that you say that, because I actually have not read The Martian, because once I saw the movie, several people told me that, basically told me that if you've seen the movie, it's very faithful. And for some reason, I felt like I saw the story, and I didn't need it. Although I was very much looking forward to this book from the first time Andy Weir announced it. So, and I listened to a lot of interviews with Andy Weir, and like I kind of said at the beginning, like I feel like he likes to talk a lot about minutia of his books. And one of the things, without giving spoilers away, because I don't think this is a spoiler, I think we're still in the non-spoiler section, the first maybe 20 pages of the book where it sets up the world of Artemis, I already felt like I knew all that because I had heard him on so many podcasts. And I know
Well,
you went into it cold. Did you? How did you feel getting introduced to the world that way?
oh, that is actually what I loved about the novel the best. Was a small city on the, I'm not very sure how small it was, but it was a city on the moon.
It has
And
about the population of a big high school, like 2,000 people.
yeah, yeah. So it was small. It is compact, of course. And I really felt that worked. That's what really kept my interest throughout it, how the rest of the community was going to be responding. It's a thriller, yes, but that was something that made it a little more than that,
Yeah.
than a science fiction thriller.
And I think it's interesting to note that Andy Weir has said that he had a different main character in his first attempt at Artemis, that the setting was the same. And he has suggested that we will see more of the city of Artemis, not necessarily the main character. So, and that to me was pretty exciting because I don't think there's any way that with 2,000 people and Jazz, the main character, being such an integral part of kind of how the city operates, I think we'll probably see her again, even if she's not a main character. But so, anyways, for without getting into total spoilers, if you have not read Artemis, it is a the small economy of this city basically functions. One of the things that helps it function is this main character, Jazz, who is she was born in Saudi Arabia, and her father immigrated to the moon and is a welder in the city. And she, through a way that I don't want to spoil yet, becomes a smuggler. She's the person who can get the things you're not supposed to get on Artemis. So she is a very important person. And thus, without giving away what she does, she's given the opportunity to make a lot of money by committing a very serious crime, and that's what kind of sets off the events of the book. And still staying in spoiler free, I would say that the crime aspects of the book for me worked because it used the setting, it used the science and the things that I think people wanted to see Andy Weir return to, and the things that you and I both kind of didn't. Well, I think you didn't like it more than me. Is that the main character, is very similar to the lead in The Martian. However, we can't get more. We'll get more into spoilers, but it just didn't. The character just wasn't as likable in this setting as in The Martian.
Yeah, one of the things that you mentioned that she's a smuggler. We know that without spoilers. What I found interesting, it is a small town, about 2,000, or a small city. What I found interesting is the interaction between the people. I mean, she's a smuggler. She does things illegal. Everybody knows it in the novel. I mean, it's just basically it is like a small 2,000 population town. You know who the criminals are. Everybody knows it. So that pretty much sets it. It is a small society, and anything one person does is going to affect the other.
Yeah, and what I think that kind of small town feel of it with the science fiction atmosphere is the things that really really work in it, and so overall, like, I didn't think this was amazing. I didn't think it was like the best thing ever. It probably won't make my. I mean, it's the first book I read of the year. So it's kind of a little premature to talk about best reads of the year. But even if I read it last year, I don't think it would have made my top 10. However, I really did enjoy it. And I do think that people who like science fiction, who like The Martian, will enjoy it. And I will say this, that The Martian was a very contained story. It had to exist within the framework of the trying to survive on Mars. There was only so much Andy Weir could do with the story, so I like the expanded world of this. And I think that overall, I would, like, if I had to put one story against the other, for me personally, Artemis would be, I like, if I could only read one, I would rather read Artemis than The Martian, personally. Any last thoughts before we get into spoilers?
No, I'm kind of anxious to get into spoilers. I think it'll explain more about why I liked it and why I have reservations.
Oh, yeah. All right, and we like to talk about how books affect us as readers. So I do think that even if you're somebody who has made up your mind, like, I don't think I want to read this book, there's still things to learn based on, how two very serious sci-fi readers reacted to this book. Spoilers ahoy, at the 11-minute mark. So, all right, so for spoilers, I would say first and foremost, can explain a little bit about what happens in case people are listening that actually didn't read the book. So once the assignment that Jazz is given is to basically sabotage the harvester AI, giant harvester AIs that grind up parts of the moon's surface that they smelt into oxygen, right? And raw material that I believe they sell to Earth. They make aluminum out of it, right? And oxygen is produced as a side effect of the production of the aluminum. And there's one company that produces the aluminum. And in the beginning, we don't know why this other company wants to get into aluminum, because it's not like aluminum is not a huge deal. So she doesn't really understand why, but one of the rich, powerful people in this small city gives her this assignment to go sabotage the machines. And that would be going a bit far. So by doing this, she is taking, like when you were saying earlier, that everybody knows that she's a smuggler and she does all these crimes, but she's taking it a step further by getting into something that can really mess with the whole city. Mm-hmm. And she's told it's no big deal. You sabotage the equipment and, I've got this backup oxygen supply. And of course, later in the book, we realize it's not that simple, because it ends up basically starving the whole city of oxygen for a certain period of time, and it floods the city with carbon monoxide and puts everyone to sleep. She basically fucks up the whole city. So the whole book is written with this, really, it has the same first-person narrative as The Martian, but it's different because Jazz is she's a very different character because, Mark Watney in The Martian was just trying to survive. And I think one of the things that's going to be really challenging for readers is Mark Watney, even though he was sarcastic, just like Andy Weir, and his personality was very Andy Weir, Mark Watney was definitely a stand-in for Andy Weir. If you spend any time listening to interviews with him, or I got the chance to briefly meet him and all that, he's a very sarcastic and kind of funny guy. Very intelligent. So Mark Watney in The Martian was very much a stand-in for him. And Jazz Basara, who is the main character of Artemis, while being of Saudi descent and a woman, still pretty much has his personality in the book, because it's written in first person. Did you have the feeling of, how did her personality affect you when you were reading it?
Well, the fact that she is Saudi national and a woman didn't really have too much to do with the plot, with one exception: her relationship with her father. Yeah, would become very important. But aside from that, it didn't really add too much to the story, to be exact.
Yeah, it had some neat world-building moments, like when they talk about how his father and the other Muslims, like, how they point themselves towards Earth when they pray and all that stuff. But little things like that. And but go ahead.
Yeah, but she's almost separate from that. I mean, that was the father's story, but it didn't really seem to gel when it came to her, I felt.
Yeah. Yeah, and look,
but to be basically to be a smuggler, to be a criminal, to be someone, and this is what I like, who knows he can do better, has a lot of background why it isn't happening, and it explains why she goes on to this kind of questionable heist and skiing. So that part I liked. I just didn't like. I didn't think she was very likable though.
well, and that's the thing is that it well, I don't think a lot of people question the idea of him writing a novel with a woman as the main character from a first person narrative, and I don't think that's a problem. I think women should be able to write men and men should be able to write women, but and I think that's fine. There were a few moments where I kind of cringed where her immature humor didn't sound like something a woman would think or say to me. They sounded more like kind of like a guy's attitude, and there were only a few of those, but for the most part, I think he handled her okay. I personally didn't mind Jazz too much as a character. I would read another novel with Jazz as the main character. However, I think this book there will be people who will not like this book because, and I talk about this in my review, Mark Watney as a character being sarcastic and self-deprecating and all that stuff works really well in The Martian because he's telling his story as he's desperate to survive. And so the first-person narrative of The Martian made sense for an author because you could imagine that if he was alone on Mars by himself, he would sit down and write his story, and he'd probably, in that situation, have that kind of sarcasm and whatever about himself and his situation coming out of the desperation, and you'd feel for him more. Now, there isn't a legitimate reason for Jazz to write a first-person narrative and tell her story because, she pulled off a heist on the moon, basically. And, Mark Watney's story in The Martian is history. Like, if that was real, that would be history that people would want to read. Whereas Jazz's story is one that I don't think she wants anybody to know, right?
Right.
She almost killed her entire town. Was involved in a very large criminal enterprise with lots of twists and turns and corporations and and all this and that, which all work as a story. But for me, and I'm not a huge fan of first-person narrative to begin with because of its limitations. So in this case, I thought the first-person narrative worked against the book, not helping the book. Now, as I was reading, it was fine. It flowed. It was well written in first person. But me personally, I don't know if that's all Andy Weir feels comfortable writing in, but I think the book would have been better in a third person, and not only that, because it could have switched point of views. And I think this book really could have done from switching point of views to get, like, Dale, the EVA master, for example, like, was an interesting character. And if we could have seen the cat and mouse chase when she almost blows up the harvesters and is trying to find an airlock to get back in, that was a great scene. But if you could have gone back and forth between POVs during that, it worked out because he had a good twist of him, like, being on the train and being there. But I think that could have worked in a third person. How do you feel about the first person in this book overall?
Yeah, the first person narrative I don't think bothered me as much as it bothers you. But I do agree that it kind of cut down the possibility that they could have had. It's already a small town, and it just narrowed it more than it already was. So that was the thing that kind of bothered me. On Jazz herself, I'm looking at my notes here, and I called her marginal like a character, but she's also selfish and greedy, and her bad judgment becomes the story, basically. And I don't think that's a good way to start a first-person narrative. Um, my essential thing was her, even though she's entertaining, even so she's marginally likable, we never go the one step to empathy that you need for a main character, especially one who's telling the story. And as I wrote in my review, I said, yes, we root for her, but we never root with her.
Right.
And so I actually found myself separated from her. I wanted her to win, of course. I wanted her to come out as well as she could. But I never really felt I was rooting with her. This was somebody I would really like.
Yeah, and I hadn't really thought about the fact that she was she was greedy and selfish, and she kind of came up with her own rationalizations. So, and from the very beginning, that creates a situation with the characters where you're, it does make it hard to root for them. So, I want to talk about, since I was kind of hard on the narrative and the way it worked, I want to talk about some of the things that I thought were really well done and really well written. The structure of the book overall, the way the story unfolds, the twists and turns, and there are lots of twists and turns. For example, when it's revealed like why the rich guy who wants to take over the aluminum industry and like why he wants to do it. There are lots of twists and turns in the way that the narrative is told, and I do think all the twists are put in there pretty perfectly. And one of the best kind of turns was early in the book. You see, at the end of each chapter, early on, there are these letters that are kind of like pen pal letters from Jazz to a boy who lives in Kenya, which is the base of all the where all the space launches happen that supply Artemis. And in the beginning, it's just like a pen pal letter, like, "Hey, you live on the moon, I live in Kenya. Let's talk about the differences in our lives." And at first I thought, oh, he's just using this for info dump and for world building, and I didn't like it. And I was all set and prepared to say, boy, these letters were a big waste. They shouldn't have been in there. But they drive the plot and they provide a twist because you eventually learn that is how that friend on the ground who gets involved in the space program when he grows up is how Jazz is able to smuggle things. And so that was something that I thought was really well written, was a really neat addition to the structure of the book, and was one time that I thought, because I think Andy Weir thinks out the science very well, and so it was cool to see like some plot and structure that I thought was really well laid out, and you could tell that that may not have been something in the first draft or something that occurred to him at some point. It tied the book together really well, and I didn't expect that to work. I don't know if that worked for you as much as it did for me.
The letter really didn't work for me.
Okay.
I didn't dislike them. I just felt they didn't really add much. It was already established that what he did was going to have something to do with why she could do her smuggling so well.
Yeah.
So I'm not very sure the extra information about him was that helpful.
Right. Now, I know you talked about in your review a little bit about how you thought this book was kind of set up to be a mainstream success. But why do you think it is that Andy Weir's books work so well with the public? Because for me, Kim Stanley Robinson is 1,000 times better of a science fiction writer. And I don't understand why his books don't have the kind of crazy success that Andy Weir does. But I know it's because Andy Weir's two books work for the mainstream a lot more. What do you think that is?
I agree with you about Kim Stanley Robinson. Did I say that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's I agree that he does much better in this sort of thing. I could name a bunch of writers now, John Scalzi, who write science fiction, Um, Now, Artemis in The Martian, of course, are science fiction, but they are geared for the mainstream. They're when you really think about it, their plots are very mainstream. Their plots do not really go into great imagination or really getting you to stretch your imagination, which I believe that good science fiction does.
No,
I
Andy,
didn't necessarily think mainstream is bad. I think there's a lot of mainstream writers I really love in many genres, but they don't really stress, as I said, stretch my imagination, and that's what I expect from a good science fiction writer.
well, you know what's interesting is I haven't heard him say this publicly, but in the conversation that I hate to sound like I'm name dropping here, but at the VIP event that Andy Weir had here, he did say that he wasn't anti-space opera, and that maybe one day that is something he would like to tackle. But I think they created a niche for him here, and I'm sure his publishers are like, build that audience, you know. So I think we're going to continue to see an Andy Weir formula for a little while.
Yeah, and I would love to see him stretched out. I think he had the originality, and I think he has the writing ability to write as you said, space opera, just something unusual. But at tight and entertaining as both The Martian and Artemis is, it doesn't do that. And I don't see any sign that you've talked to him. I haven't, but from either novel, I don't see any sign in which he hints that he's going to do something like that.
Yeah, I don't think we'll see it anytime soon, but I think we'll hopefully. I would like to personally. I'd like to see another novel set on Artemis with another main character. But you know, I would read. Well, either way, I'm going to read another Artemis book if it happens.
Yeah.
But you know, I think overall, I had fun reading this book. And I thought it was entertaining. It was a page turner for me. I read it very quickly. You know, I had this book on my lap while football was on, and you know, there was a bad game on that was a blowout, and next thing you know, I read 110 pages, you know, in one sitting. And
it read very quickly.
So it read very, very quickly, and thankfully to a bad football game, I got through a lot of it pretty quick. It's just for me. I think that definitely. I think a few people are going to be turned off by Jazz as a character, and I think it would be. I'm sure that there are people in Andy Weir's ear telling him that, hey, part of the thing that everyone liked about The Martian was the sarcasm and so much of your personality that came out in Mark Watney. And I'm sure he was told to do that because I know I've heard in interviews where he's said that he's very clearly stated that that's still there. So, like, you know, he said, he has said in interviews that Jazz is sarcastic just like me, you know, and he has keyed to that, and so I have a feeling he's being told that that's something that's important. However, if you read some of the reviews on Goodreads, if you read the bad reviews, that a couple people have stated that they didn't like that. So it would be nice to see him stretch his wings a little bit and kind of come up with different characters, and maybe a way into that is taking the characters that he already created that aren't like that. A novel about Jazz's father would be great. He's a great fully realized character in the periphery of this novel who could be an interesting person to set a novel around. And create an interesting scenario when the main character of your last book is on the periphery or a side character. That would be interesting, and I would like to see that. I don't know how you feel about where Andy Weir goes with Artemis in the future, but...
I wouldn't mind seeing another Artemis novel. I think there's a lot of promise there. There's a lot of different things you can do with it. My guess is I'm just going to take a wild guess here and say that he would probably be off having brand new characters and having the ones who are in the Artemis novel. Maybe they're on small cameo roles or something just for continuity.
Well, he could also use the universe of, like, for example,
what's that?
Well, he could also use this universe and expand on it because imagine, like, in Artemis, like the space program or the private space program that that launches to the moon is based in Kenya, and the reason why Kenya would be a good place to do that is because it's at the equator. So it's a shorter distance from ground to the atmosphere. That's why we launched in Florida, for example, and like as far south as we can go. And Kenya is in a unique situation because in this book, Kenya supports that private space program because they give tax breaks and all that kind of stuff. So Artemis and Kenya are linked. So it might be really interesting to do a story that takes place in Kenya with that space program that still connects to Artemis, and he could use the character Kelvin is the one in the letters. Yeah, Kelvin.
Yeah.
You could do a novel about him. So yeah, Andy Weir, you should do that. I would like to read that because I think you could get again into the science. You could use the science of like. Into more like future space launches and that kind of thing, and
Kind of interesting, though, that we have been criticizing him for having basically be limited at a science fiction novel, and now we're saying let's write another one.
Yeah. Well, and look at all these look at all these cool elements he set up, and so. Yeah, we both overall recommend this book, I think, because you 3 stars is a recommendation from you and 4 stars is a recommendation from me. I think we both believe that it's a good book overall.
Right.
I think the reason why people are hard on Andy Weir is because the meteoric rise, like these books are not just a success. I mean, like I can tell you at the UCSD event, the line. I mean, the room was packed. It was a giant theater. The line to get signed books was out the door. This was an immediate bestseller. The Martian was a #1 New York Times bestseller. So I think that sets a high bar, right? And the success of having a movie made by Ridley Scott starring Matt Damon, I think that there's a really high bar. And so I definitely feel for Andy Weir that he had a lot to live up to with this book. And I think for the most part, like me personally, like, Artemis seems like a cooler book than The Martian overall. But I think that, I just think with that high bar comes, looking at things like we could have liked this book more had the character worked better. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And I do predict there will be a movie.
Well, he's already sold the film rights. And
he sold. Yeah, that makes sense.
and the audiobook was read by Rosaria Dawson, which...
Okay.
Yeah. Pretty big name.
I could see her in the role.
Yeah. Yeah, they cast the audiobook really well. And I did see Comic-Con New York panel where Rosaria Dawson talked with Andy Weir about the book. And I only saw a few minutes of it, but it was pretty interesting because she had a very small window in which to record the book, so they didn't get to communicate as much as they had hoped leading up to it. So I know he was pretty pleased with her interpretation, but yeah, that's on Audible if anyone wants to hear that. And I did think about listening to it on there just because I do really like her as an actor. And okay, so final thoughts on Artemis, like overall.
Well, overall, like we said, it's enjoyable. It's entertaining. I think it's more. I actually think it's more entertaining as a thriller than a science fiction novel. We haven't really mentioned that one thing here Andy Weir does. He seemed to have shown that he can write action pretty well. I think even more so than in the Martian, which was limited. But yeah, I would recommend it. I just think it wasn't that great science fiction.
Yeah, that's interesting because I don't think you can separate science fiction from the story, just obviously because of the setting but the science was such a huge part of even a lot of the action. Take for example the sabotage of the harvesters. Like there was so much science involved in, like, oh, we're flooding the city with carbon monoxide. We need to get to so and so to reconnect the oxygen lines from this, and that all required science. So I will counter a little bit that I think that the science was really heavily involved in all aspects of the story. But yeah, the thriller elements and the action, I think he did a really good job with that, and it would be interesting to see more on that. More of that in his career, and but yeah, I think for science fiction fans who like hard science fiction, you can't miss it if you like hard sci-fi. But beyond that, I don't. I definitely think that if you enjoyed The Martian, I think this is a better book. I know I haven't read The Martian, but it's a better story, I should say. It's got more layers and more elements, and I think it flexes his muscles a little bit more. I just wish the character was a little different. That's a nitpick. I liked the book more than you. I gave it 4 stars. A lot because of the pace. I thought the pace worked really well. I digested pages really, really fast, and that to me is a really good sign. And also the book I started reading after it before I wrote my review was really, really bad, so that helped this one look really good.
that always makes a difference.
Yes, and then I was missing Artemis by the time I got 40 pages into the next book. So yeah, that's all I got to say on that. So if somebody made it this far listening to our review, you can check out our reviews on our blogs. My blog is Postcards from a Dying World. It's just davidagranoff.blogspot.com. And you can find my books on Amazon if you're interested in reading any of those. I only have one science fiction book out so far, Flesh Trade, but I will say it made Marvin's top 10 list of the year. So it's the best honor that Flesh Trade has had yet. Marvin, where can they find your reviews again?
You can find my reviews on The Novel Pursuit, thenovelpursuit.blogspot.com. And you can I also have a Goodreads page. All my reviews show up both on the blog and on my Goodreads page under Marvin Vernon. That's pretty much it. Those are the best. Let's put it this way: those are the best places to find my reviews. They are also a few websites and things, but you will always see my reviews there on either Goodreads or The Novel Pursuit.
All right. So thank you for listening, everybody, and hopefully we'll have another review soon. I always, whenever I see a review of a book that Marvin's read that I know I've read, I drop him a line. So, and it's good because the first 2 we ever did were both zombie books, so it's good. We've gone a couple without doing a zombie one, so maybe we'll have to do a zombie one again soon. So,
New year. It's hard to say what we're going to read this year.
Yes, it's a new year, and I'm going to read a few classics for a while. Maybe we should try to team up on some classics.
Okay. If we give you that warning.
Yes, yeah. Yes, we'll talk about that. I know one I'm reading coming up soon is a horror novel by a Middle Eastern writer called Escape from Baghdad. That looks really interesting from a couple years ago. and that looks really good. So, but I'll tell you what. I'll give you a heads up. Maybe we'll collaborate on some classics that we both wanted to read or reread. So,
hey, good.
Yeah, Marvin, good talking to you about Artemis. So, in the end, it's a good book. It is a recommendation, and there is lots of good writing involved. And I have included the Andy Weir lecture, so if you want to hear it from his perspective, the Andy Weir lecture I was at will also be in this blog post. And there was one annoying woman who kept yelling random things at Andy Weir, and she was sitting right in front of me, and I was as annoyed as you, and I'm sorry I didn't take a chance to tell her to shut up. So, as weird as that sounds to end it, thanks for calling in, Marvin, and we'll talk soon.
Okay.
Bye.